And stay with WJZ for new developments in Souter's murder. We are following the press conference right now, and we are going to go to that press conference
as it pertains specifically to the November 15th murder of Detective Sean Souter. Special Agent in Charge Gordon has been responsive, collaborative, and has dedicated FBI resources to our investigation. In fact, the FBI, ATF, and DEA have all been embedded into the investigation from the very beginning. Acting United States Attorney for Maryland, Steve Shenning, has been equally responsive. Detective Souter was scheduled to appear before a federal grand jury the day after he was killed, pursuant to his knowledge of facts regarding a 2010 crime indicted just yesterday as part of the Broken Boundaries corruption investigation. I have been told by the FBI and the United States Attorney's Office that Detective Souter was never a target of the Broken Boundaries investigation and that no information exists connecting his murder to the corruption case. The circumstances surrounding Detective Souter's killing are significantly complicated by the fact that he was to appear before a federal grand jury the following day. I am growing increasingly uncomfortable that my homicide detectives do not know all of the facts known to the FBI or the U.S. Attorney's Office that could, if revealed to us, assist in furthering this murder investigation. I respectfully request the FBI to investigate the murder of Detective Sean Souter. Please contact me to further discuss at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Kevin Davis, Police Commissioner. Any questions? Jane?
Investigation. I just want to ask you something. It's been, I mean, we're all aware that there are elements of this investigation, as you said. You used the word complicated. There is some physical evidence in this case that obviously would suggest the possibility of a self-inflicted wound. Can you comment on that angle and element of this investigation?
Well, Jane, I've said from the very, very beginning that we will follow the evidence wherever the evidence goes. As we continue to examine the evidence, we come up against probabilities and possibilities. We are not going to discount any possibility whatsoever. I would add to that we have physical evidence that suggests a struggle. The appearance of Detective Souter's clothing suggests a struggle. The radio transmission that is unintelligible, and the FBI made every effort to enhance it, and they can't enhance it. It's still, to me, a 2-3 second radio transmission made by Detective Souter that is clearly made in distress. And at the conclusion of that very brief radio transmission, you hear the sound of a gunshot. So the possibility of what you spoke of, Jane, is something that we're not discounting. If the evidence leads us in that direction, we'll go there. If the evidence leads us in the direction of a conspiracy, we'll go there. If the evidence leads us in the direction of an unknown perpetrator who we have yet to identify, and that's very frustrating to all of us, we'll go there too. So we're not discounting anything, but I remain committed to following the evidence, and the involvement particularly of the FBI and the ATF from the very, very beginning when it comes to evidence handling and investigation is important to the integrity of the investigation, particularly for the community. So it's not just the BPD involved in this case. It's the BPD, ATF, FBI, and DEA. And that's been the case since day one. Our homicide detectives are more than capable of handling this or any other murder investigation. Baltimore homicide detectives have been heralded for many, many years as the most talented in this country. Television shows have been made about Baltimore homicide detectives. This is, however, about who murdered Sean Souter. How did it happen? What happened? And this is also about having all the pieces of the puzzle available to homicide detectives so they can conduct a quality investigation. As I stated in my letter, I'm uncomfortable right now that we just don't have all the pieces to the puzzle. And yesterday's indictment revelation was an example of finding out information that I just didn't know before, and that makes me uncomfortable. Kevin?
To be clear, are you saying that, are you asking the FBI to take over your investigation or to also investigate on a parallel track?
To take over the entire investigation.
Which would conclude your department's investigation?
Well, certainly if the FBI agreed to take over the investigation, it would be my best guess that they would absolutely want us involved in that, but they would be, Kevin, the lead on the murder investigation. This request is a request only. I don't know how the FBI will respond to it, but it's a request that I decided to make several days ago out of respect to the Suter family, out of respect to the BPD family. I waited until after the funeral and after we buried Sean. And again, our homicide detectives here, more than capable of investigating this or any other case, but they got to have all the pieces to the puzzle in front of them to make that case.
Do you feel
Brian?
that your homicide detectives have exhausted every lead that they have been tracking down these last 2.5 weeks, and
No.
they're just up against the wall? Like,
Yeah, Brian, I wouldn't say we're stalled or up against the wall. We've had several leads and tips that got us excited throughout this investigation, and they didn't pan out. They didn't go anywhere. So we're not at a even remotely near a place where we would say we're cold on this case, but we just haven't had that breaking piece of evidence or information made available to us that all of us, you guys, us, would expect to happen faster in a case like this. And that's a source of frustration.
so what do you feel that the FBI knows that you're not getting?
Well,
You felt uncomfortable, so why uncomfortable?
Well, the FBI is still actively involved in the Broken Boundaries corruption investigation. So it started with 7 indicted police officers back on March the 1st of this year. Another Baltimore police officer was indicted. A former Baltimore police officer who is now a Philadelphia police officer was then indicted. And then yesterday's additional indictment of former Sergeant Wayne Jenkins and revelations of other officers who were present during that planning of evidence is information and names in those circumstances that are new to me. So finding out information on the fly, finding out investigative information at the same time you guys find out about it makes me uncomfortable that we don't know all the information that we need to know to conduct a murder investigation. Jane?
Can you say if there is any physical evidence, DNA, fingerprint, anything to link or to suggest a second person? Any objective physical evidence?
So the objective physical evidence, Jane, that we do have is signs of a struggle on Detective Suter's clothing. That's physical evidence. Physical evidence is also in the form of a radio transmission and a gunshot. Right now, there is no DNA evidence or other forensic evidence, blood, etc., that identifies the perpetrator. That's not unusual that type of evidence doesn't exist, but that's where we are right now.
Well, identifying a perpetrator or identifying a second person. I guess they're one
Right.
and the same in this case.
One and the same. There's Jane, there is no, at the moment, there is no evidence that speaks to that.
Yesterday you mentioned that you would, over the next several hours or the day, request from the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office whether or not they had any additional information they could provide to you that could enlighten you on the actions of Ryan Gwynn. I think there's another sergeant mentioned as being called to the scene in that indictment against Jenkins. Have you had that conversation, and have you taken any steps against any additional officers related to that indictment?
So, Kevin, I have had that conversation with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. They have identified the other officer, I believe, in yesterday's indictment, officer number 2. That officer number 2 has been identified, and he is still a Baltimore police officer, and I suspended him this morning.
And to be clear, that's Ryan Gwynn.
We can't discuss personnel matters like that.
The sergeant that's identified as only a sergeant in the indictment, he's been identified as well, and I can tell you that he retired back in June of 2012.
And WJZ will have much more on this investigation coming up on WJZ tonight at 4, 5, and 6.
And we'll be right back after this.